Hello and welcome to Beyond Tracking in Mocha Pro, in depth and in action.
My name's Ben Brownlee from Curious Turtle, and I'm going to be taking you through Mocha Pro over the next few hours, and we're going to be going through the different modules and looking at the different features that Mocha Pro has to offer. But before we start with any practical projects, what I want to do is just make sure that we go through the preferences quite quickly, just to make sure that we've got the setup and the UI all as we like it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just come into my preferences up here. Okay, so in the preferences, we are going to start with the output settings here, and we're just going to look through the output directory. Now, the output directory is where we're going to save our project files. So we've got a choice of either a relative path, so that the project files and the backup files are going to be saved in a folder along with the original footage, or we can also choose an absolute path and actually basically set a specific folder where all of our results are going to go, so where all of our projects and our backups are going to go. Now, this is of course going to be decided by your particular workflow. Now, generally I'll keep this on relative path if I'm working on fast local storage, and the reason for that is that I personally prefer, when I'm working on a specific project by myself, I actually like having the results set in with my main footage folder. It makes it easier when I archive the project off to just sort of be able to copy over an entire folder. Now, the other option of absolute path, which I'm actually working on here, is great when you're getting your footage off of a network drive, or as in this case, I actually am going to be saving all of my results in a specific folder so that I can give them out with this course here. So to set the absolute path, all you do is you just click on the little folder icon here, and you come along and choose your folder that you want to save it to. And of course, the little disk space available here is giving you an indication of how much free space you have available. Now, the cache directory is where Mocha is going to be writing all of the temp files associated with your project, and also going to be saving out render files as you're working on the project here. Now, this is definitely recommended to be a fast local drive. You really don't want to have your cache directory on a network drive if you can avoid it, because this has to be fast for Mocha to work at its full potential. And again, to choose the cache directory, you just click on the little folder over here and navigate to where you want it to go to. Next, we have the cache original clip. Now, I would use this only if the footage that I was working on is either coming off of a network drive or coming off a different sort of external drive that's actually not very fast. Now, what this will do here is it will make a copy of your original clip into the cache directory onto your fastest drive, so that again you can work with the best sort of speed possible. Now, use hardware rendering and use textures are both related to your graphics card, and again this will help to speed up the process. So if you have a use hardware rendering turned on, it's going to let you use OpenGL to generate the mats up, so that's going to speed things up quite substantially. And use textures. This uses your graphics card's texture memory to basically store the shapes, and again going to help speed things up as compared to turning this off, where everything gets done in the software. So using your main computer CPU. Now, the amount of texture RAM to reserve in megabytes is again related to the size of your graphics card. So my graphics card has 512 megabytes of RAM, and Imagineer Systems recommends that 3/4 of that number is actually a good place to start with your texture RAM. So 512, 3/4 of 512 would be, off the top of my head, 384, round about that anyway. And so that would be a good place to start. Let's come back to my preferences again. I accidentally hit OK. So that would be a good place to start there. Of course, if you've got a fatter, heftier graphics card, stick that number up accordingly. Right, now our next tab is System, and this is really about controlling some of the UI stuff The first one here is autosave, which I obviously have enabled, and that's set to save every 5 minutes. Now this is the default settings and actually something that I would keep as well. So this just keeps a backup copy of your project if anything goes wrong. And save images every frame is all about how Mocha is going to be writing to the drive when we start to work with some of the different modules. The next one is the user interface look and feel, and gives you the choice of how many different types of layouts that you have available. Custom layouts these are, as opposed to the default layout, which we're seeing at the moment. The number of custom layouts, again, 3 is the default settings, and the one that I tend to keep. Generally, I'll work with 1 for the tracking, 1 for the roto, and 1 for spare, 1 for playing around with. The next one here is rotational controls or linear controls, and this determines how we play around with scrubbing through the numbers here. Because wherever we see a text box with numbers, we can just click in it and we can either scrub it rotationally around there, or we can use the linear controls and we can scrub it back and forth. Now, I'm working with a Wacom pen and tablet, so actually it's easier for me to just be scrubbing this round rotationally. If you're working with a mouse, actually the linear controls feel a bit easier with the mouse, I found. An invert mouse wheel just changes the zoom behavior of your mouse wheel. So again, this is really more about what you're accustomed to in other pieces of software. So it just lets you keep that same feel when you're working with Mocha. The default layer settings here gives us a choice of different overlay colors. We will be looking at these as we're working through the projects, and the X-spline default weight and the Bezier default length. Again, we'll be looking at how these behaviors work as we go through. The default settings here are generally fine for the way that I work, but of course you can feel free to change these up as you want to. Final one is history. Maximum size is 100. This uses up just a little bit of RAM for you, but it means you've got 100 states of undo. Software update, pretty self-explanatory. Do you want to have Mocha check for software updates automatically? So yes, I do. That'd be very nice. And these will pop up actually when you open up Mocha. You'll get a nice big window telling you that there's an update available and what's new in the updated version, and it will direct you to the right place to download it.
Right, so let's move on to the next tab, which is our clip tab here. And this contains most of the default settings that we can use to bring in clips. These kick into action when Mocha Pro can't determine the actual clip properties from your file. So let's take a little look. So we've got the defaults of frames per second, pretty self-explanatory. We're going to be working with 25 frames per second for most of our footage. And we have our custom pixel aspect ratio here. So if you know that a certain subset of your footage is going to have some weird and wacky pixel aspect ratio, best to type it in here. So if Mocha can't identify the pixel aspect ratio from the clip properties, then this is what it's going to fall back on as your custom aspect ratio. We can also take a look at either frames or time code, so we can view clips either with a frame offset or as time code here. I'm going to leave this set to frames, and my frame offset, which we will talk about in much greater detail when we come to import a clip, is going to be set at 1. Now when we come to the color space, we have linear, log or panelog. So linear is the standard thing that we're going to be bringing in if we're using just sort of regular QuickTime movies. Log if we're working with logarithmic footage, DPX files, that sort of thing. And this opens up some other options for us as well. And then we have panelog if we're using the the panelog specific format. Now we have convert to float and convert to 8-bit. So this enables our clips to move beyond their original format here. So for example, if we were taking something out to DPX here, which we've got in the results thing here, and we want to keep everything in floating point format, then we can click convert to float in here, and this means that any linear footage that we bring in is now going to be able to work in floating point. And the same, we're working with 32-bit footage or floating point footage. We can convert that down to 8-bit, and that will save a lot of processing there. Now, the format for results clips, as it sort of says, is really only for clips that we're rendering out. So stuff that we're actually taking out directly through the Mocha modules. Interlacing. So if we're working with interlaced footage, we need to tell Mocha Pro that we're doing that before we even start. So if you know that you're going to be working with interlaced footage and it's not being picked up when you import the clips, this is where you can set it up. But basically, for all of these choices here, you will be given this option again when you actually import a clip. Separate fields is currently set to either PAL or NTSC. This is actually a mislabeling. This should be upper field first or lower field first. So they're just sort of legacy labels there for the time being. And if you work in the NTSC, you can also be interpreting 3-2 pull down. And when we take a look at the clip module, we'll be able to see how we can interpret that what sort of 3-2 pull down it actually is. But our footage doesn't have fields. It's mainly going to be progressive, so I'm going to turn that off. And the mask, this just helps deal with blanking that's found on certain formats. Mainly your SD formats are going to have a significant amount of blanking at the top and the left and right, sometimes at the bottom as well. So here you can mask that stuff out before you even bring it in. But again, we're going to look at this when we move into the clip module. Lens is another one we're going to be talking about later when we specifically visit the lens module there. So let's just move straight on to logging. So logging allows us to keep a log of crashes and any problems we have, so that if we need to report a bug, we can report it straight to Imagineer Systems and send the error log along with it. Let's just come out here for a second, come out to our help tools here, and we can report an error directly within the help module. And finally, we'll take a look at keyboard shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts, we have different keyboard shortcuts for all of the various modules here. So, and we can actually change these up as we need to. So, auto nudge in the adjust track here, for example, is G. We can change that to, if we wanted to change that, let's just double click on that. We can change that to Shift G, gives us a big one. And that's now going to be saved as soon as we save that there. Lovely. And that's all done for us. Or we can hit back to the defaults, which is fairly useful. Cool. And okay, that's the preferences all sorted out. We got hit OK on that. So if I want to start up a new clip, I'm going to go to my top toolbar up here and go to the first clip on the top left. So users familiar with Mocha version 2 or above are going to feel pretty much at home within this new interface. So it's got quite a good, top to bottom, left to right sort of workflow here. So let's have a little look at our new project. We're going to import a little clip here. Doesn't really matter which clip I'm going to take. Let's take my analog wall clip, just because that was the right one there. We can give a project the name here. So I'm going to call this Analog Wall version 1. We've got a location. So this is where we're going to save it. And at the moment, this is saving it in my default directory. I can then change that at any time I want to here. When it comes to the options, we can take in the full frame range of the movie, which is going from 0 to 103, or we can just take in a smaller section of the clip itself. With frame properties, this will try to detect what the frame properties are, make a good guess for it, and it's got it spot on here. If not, then it will go back to the defaults that we had set previously. So these are all perfectly fine here. And under the advanced, we've got our frame offset. So this is reading this from the time code. So if I click on time code here, we can see that this clip starts at 10 hours, 12 seconds, and 21 frames. Or we can go directly to the frame numbers. Or if we really want to,
we can just stick in our own frame offset here. Now, if you're dealing with the clip in a sort of self-contained sort of way, it actually isn't going to matter too much if we're taking it out to something like After Effects, what your frame offset is, because that will automatically compensate for the keyframes. That will just paste the keyframes in as and where they lie. But of course, this will have some other consequences for other software. So the cache clip is again repeated here. The color space parameters are again coming from our preferences. So we're setting this to linear, and we've got the conversion, whether we want to convert it to floating point or 8-bit, or whether just keep it in its original color space. I'm going to hit OK on that. And here we go. So we're going to start with our toolbar up here. And actually, the nice thing about Mocha is that we can pretty much drag and drop any part of the UI along just by clicking on the little left-hand tab or the top tab, depending where it is. And we can put it back by just docking it back where it used to be. There we go. So we can customize our UI pretty much any way we like it. If you fancy having loads of floating windows all over the place, be my guest, you can have that there as well. Okay, so we've got our top toolbar along here. We've got Start a New Project, we've got Open an Old Project, and we've got Save Our Project here. We've got Undo and Redo. Can't do anything with those at the moment because they're not. We haven't actually done anything yet. And then we've got our main toolbar along here. So this is basically broken up into different sections. We've got our first section, which is our black arrow, which is our pick tool. And this lets us pick out little points and drag points around as we need to. And combined with the pick tool, we can select different parts of the tool, and this will become slightly more obvious when we're working through this a little bit later. So I'm going to skip over all of those. We've got our white plus arrow tool, so this lets us come in and add points to a previous shape. We've got our pan tool, which lets us just pan around the image here, pan around the pasteboard. Now the keyboard shortcut for that is X. I won't be giving out a load of keyboard shortcuts, but I will be giving out some that I think are really, really important. So X is a really fantastic keyboard shortcut to go with, because that is the pan tool, and right next to it we have our zoom tool, which lets us zoom in. If we go up and down, up we zoom in, down we zoom out, and we actually zoom in to the point that we click and zoom through. Also, that's just and that keyboard shortcut for that is Z. So the great thing about these two keyboard shortcuts, the X for the pan tool and the Z for the zoom, is that if we, let's just go to our regular picker tool there. Now if we press and hold on either one of the Z or the X, we can actually switch between those tools. See, I'm holding down the X key and I'm in the pan tool mode. I let go of the X key, it will automatically switch me back to whatever tool I was last working on. The same with the zoom key. If I hold the Z key down, it's going to let me zoom. Let it go, and it takes me back to the last tool that I was working with. Really, really useful. So if you're going to learn any two keyboard shortcuts, make sure it's those two. So moving along here, we've got our next row of tools. This is all about splines and creating new splines. So this is how we're going to start to create shapes up, basically. So we've got the X-spline tool, which the first one will actually create a new layer as we roam around our X-spline. The next one along here is add an X-spline to an existing layer. And there we go. So if we take a look over here in our layer controls over here, we can see that I've got my first layer, which I will call X splines. The next one, along with the B, is creating a Bezier spline. And we will, now let's just right click to finish off the shape. And we've got the plus Bezier there. So we can add Beziers to another shape layer. And I'm going to call this Bezier. There we go. What we can also do is let's just hide those. What we can also do is we can mix and match different shapes or different types of shapes within the same layer. So we don't actually have to have one layer that is only X spline and one layer that is only Bezier splines. Cool, so we've got our attach tool over here, and we've got switch lock tangents on and off. And again, we'll come back to this as we start to explore the different splines. And the next one along is our rotate. Let's take me back to the next ones along are rotate, scale, and translate. And these are, again, other keyboard shortcuts I'm going to let you in on. So we have Q, W, and E on the top line. And these are other ones that will let us sort of switch between them just by pressing and holding them down. So Q is translate, W is rotate or rotate, and the place that it rotates around is the point at which you start clicking and dragging, and you can start to see the angle of difference. So the dotted line we have here is our start rotation, and the solid line is where we're currently at. So that's W, and E is of course scale, and again it sets the anchor point from where we start to scale things up. If we have multiple points selected, for example here, and then I'm going to click and I'm going to press and hold E, I could just scale those two particular points as I want to. Cool. All right. So that's the main toolbar along the top there. Well, the next one we've actually taken a quick look at already, and that's the layer controls over here. So this gives us an overview of our different shape layers. So we've got a layer name, which if we double click on any layer, we can change. So this is going to be my mixed. I would recommend, in fact, highly recommend naming your layers in a good and consistent way. I'll be showing you how I'm going to name my layers, of course, but so long as you keep it consistent, that's the main point. Because when we start working with multiple layers, things are going to get very confusing very fast. So especially if you start doing rotoscoping with the Mocha Pro itself, that's where things start to get a little bit tricky. And we're working with lots of layers for the remove as well. That's again a time where it starts getting a little bit important that you actually know what layer is what. And all the layers have 3 buttons along. We have the visibility, which we can turn on and off. We have the track or render cog. So this is telling Mocha if we're going to be doing an action on these particular layers. So in the track module, the cog here implies that we're going to be tracking. If we move over to the remove module here, and we have this cog turned on here, it's all about rendering this particular layer, so removing this particular layer. So that's where we're at. And we have a lock, of course, which is going to lock out movement on those particular layers. So we can't accidentally make any changes, set new keyframes on any of those layers. And then finally, we have the little overlay colors down here, which correspond to the colors that we see within the viewer here. And we can change whatever those colors are in our overlay colors down at the bottom here. So just while we're at it, let's come in and change that to a blue instead. You can see that when this layer is now selected, it's going to become blue. Yes, it is. And when this layer is selected, it's still going to be at the default red. So this is quite a handy way of grouping your layers together using color. So color coding your layers up again, when you're working with multiple layers, things can start getting quite confusing if you don't systematize everything you start to do within the layer controls, and that includes assigning colors. We come down here to the bottom of the layer controls. Here we have our duplicate layer, we have our trash layer, so we delete the layer there. We can also come in and just delete a single spline in a layer. So if I have my spline selected here, I can just delete that individual spline without deleting the entire layer. So in the same way, I can come in and I can lock all of my layers and unlock all of my layers. So if I've got any layer that is locked before time, then this will just sort of toggle that on and off. Cool. And the align surface, well, this is going to be of much more importance when we actually have something tracked. At the moment, it's not going to do anything. So we're going to skip out on that. Now we're almost there. We're just come to our layer properties now. And all of our layers can have a in and out point, which don't have to correspond to the in and out points of our overall project. So for example, if we take a look at this footage here, let's just get rid of all of that. So we'll take a look at this footage here. We can see that the main body of our girl here doesn't come in until a third of the way through the clip. So what's the point in, having a shape layer that starts at frame 1 when we actually have nothing to even think about tracking until about frame 20, frame 26. So we can actually set in and out points for our individual layers, and they won't show up. They'll be deactivated before that and after that there. And that's what these buttons do here. So let's turn on my mix layers here, come to frame 14. If I set my in point there, you can see that now on the timeline down here, it's showing up red, which means that it's only these frames that are untracked. Everything else is white, which means that the clip is, for all intents and purposes, deactivated before and after that specific range. Now, if I wanted to clear that in and out point, those are just the inside 4 buttons there. And these buttons for the layers are exactly the same as the ones down here that are being used for the actual overall project. Blend mode, insert clip, mat clip, and link to track are all things that we will be working with as we move through the course. So we're going to skip over those, and the same with the edge properties. It's all about how we add softness and blurs to our mats. So we're going to skip over those for the time being, and come in and look at the other stuff. So the next thing here is all about the viewer, which is this main viewport here, and we can choose which clip it is that we're working on at the moment. We can look at individual mats that we've created, and this is where we can see things like motion blur and that sort of thing. We've got full, half and quarter, so if we want to work in proxies, we can do that here. So this is a great way of speeding up tracks when we don't need all that, especially when we're working at HD, when we don't need a lot of the data that the HD frame is giving us. This is one of the important concepts that we'll take a look at when we look at the planar tracker, is that it's okay if we've got a slightly blurry image, because it's not like a point tracker where it's looking for a very, very specific area. The planar tracker works in a very different way, which we'll see in the next exercise. So we can happily, for quite a lot of the time, especially during the tracking stuff, if we're working at HD or above frame size, we can happily drop this down, and our quality of results is still going to be high. We're just going to be getting there a lot faster. Next to here, we've got our color channels, which we can turn on and off. We can toggle these on and off, and we've got our alpha channel here as well. If we had an alpha channel, this is where it would show up. We don't, so there's absolutely nothing to see here at the moment. So if we just turn the alpha channel on, we've got a pure white, which means that everything is turned on. Now we come over to our mats. This is what we've been creating with our shapes here. If I turn these on, I can toggle this on and off just by clicking on the mats here. And by clicking on the down arrow here, I've now got a choice of seeing either all mats, just the selected mats, or the selected track mats. And we'll actually be talking about track mats in the next exercise when we're looking at this footage. Cool, and the next one here is how we're going to check out those mats. Are we going to do the paint bucket fill? If we have that turned off, we'll actually see what it's going to look like cut out. This is great for when we're doing roto work and you want to see the quality of your shapes. And along with the color fill, we can take the opacity of that down, so we've got a much better idea of what's going on underneath. And we can turn that up if we really don't care about what's underneath. We just want to look at the pure shape. So that goes between 0.1 and 1. Quite a bit of the time you'll see me working at lower opacity levels here. Cool, so let's turn the mats off. We also have a toggle. Let's see, turn that on again. We actually have a toggle for taking all the overlays on and off. So the overlays are let's turn these on. So the overlays are the shapes that we have here. We'll turn those off. And we can choose exactly what overlays we're seeing, whether we're seeing the overlays for the all layers or just the selected layers here. And we'll take this button on and off. This takes off just our outlines here. Or we can turn off and on the handles using the next button. And again, it's the tangents, either the selected tangents we're looking at or all tangents. Do we want to see the splines and just the dots? There we go. So we actually have full control over our over what we're seeing here on our interface. And a good deal of the time, we will actually be wanting to, sort of strip down certain parts of the viewer so that we can see other things a little bit better. The next one is the surface, and we'll be getting to the surface and discussing the importance of the surface in the next exercise. This is a vital concept to know about Mocha Pro, so we'll be spending a bit of time on that. Coupled with that is the grid, which is tied directly to the surface. So when we move the surface around, we also move the grid around. There's no independent controls for the surface. For the grid. It's controlled entirely by the surface. Let's turn the surface off as well. The final one here is our zoom window, and we can either have our zoom window turned on or not, or turned off. Stabilize trace preview we will be looking at as we start moving along. And in fact, the final button we have here lets us play around a little bit with the gamma in the image, so that we can sort of get a better idea in dark scenes about where the lines are that we actually want to be drawing, and we can compensate for overbright scenes as well. So that's the gamma there for you. That's a preview only. It's not going to affect the tracking. Now we will be discussing how we can affect the footage for the tracking when we start talking about our clip module down there. Cool, and the very last one that we're going to look at in this exercise is this little viewer preferences down here. So our viewer preferences let us change things like the dividers in the grid, so we can either have them much simpler or much more refined. And it also lets us change the trace, which we'll be looking at again when we actually start to look at the trace. Skip on playback, how many frames we're going to be skipping, and we can come in and we can adjust our mask directly within our viewer here as well. But the thing we'll be changing most often in this preferences is going to be the grid dividers and how we view the grid. Cool. Down at the bottom here are all the parameters and the curve editor. I'm going to be saving that for the individual exercises that are going to go through these in a bit more detail. So So we're going to stop exploring the interface here, and in the next exercise we're going to start to look at the planar tracker, what it is and how it works, and how it is going to make our life a lot easier when it comes to tracking and removing objects. Understanding how the planar tracker works is fundamental to getting the most out of Mocha Pro, because pretty much all the tools are based around the planar tracker and knowing how that works. So that's what we're going to be looking at in depth in the next exercise.